Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Secret Origins of Mint Condition. I am one of your hosts, James, and this is another Halloween-themed episode. And joining me for it is Joe
Hey folks, how you doing?
and Chris.
Hey, y'all.
And once again, special guest and friend of the show, Josh Murray, is with us.
Hey.
Oh, hello. Yeah, woo, yeah.
And we are in the bowels of either Count Dracula or Victor Frankenstein's castle because we're talking about something that we've mentioned over the years, but we've never done a separate episode on it, and that is the Universal monsters. Which I will point out, I personally feel, well, not personally, I think it's like they are the first like franchise movie series to link before the MCU and
Yeah.
the ill-fated DCEU and all that other stuff. There was the Universal Monsters, which wasn't always a one-for-one like matchup in terms of the storytelling completely, but they did try to follow the previous movies and tried to link all of them together.
It's also a lot more extensive than I ever realized it was. So we could also be up in the belfry of Notre Dame, which
Yes.
I didn't know. So I enjoyed doing a little bit of homework for this episode.
Or even in the bowels of an opera house with the
which again did not realize that he was, which I know we'll get to, but like didn't realize that he was considered one of the Universal classic monsters.
Yeah, so I mean, my love of Universal Monsters, I think, has been clear on this podcast. We've talked about it in past.
You've mentioned it once or twice.
I've mentioned it once or twice, but I kind of was like thinking about this episode. Especially Joe mentioned it as an idea for our Halloween episodes a couple weeks ago, and I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. We never talked to that, but the quintessential question, which I'm about to pose to all of you, like, why do you like these? Why do these movies last? Why do we like these monsters? And I have a hard time answering it specifically for myself. Like, just like I like watching them. But you've asked me like why, and why do I do it? So maybe I'll get my answer a little bit more. My thoughts are more clear. Listen to you, but so Joe, since you suggested this episode, I'm going to start with you. Why do we love these Universal monsters?
Because they're filmed in glorious black and white. Thank God they didn't have color processing in 1931. Maybe they did, but they didn't use them on a wide scale. I don't know how that works, but that's part of the appeal. That's part of the whole legend of these films. The shadows, the things carved out of shadows. They're just beautiful to watch. They're supposed to be scary. I mean, they're not that scary now. When I was a kid, they were very scary. But I just love the way they were produced. I mean, James Wales, right? One of the directors. Val Lewton, I believe, was another.
Yeah.
I mean, these were incredible directors who knew their subject matter and pulled these amazing movies off. So I'm going to go with black and white. That's the thing that brought me to these films and still keeps me there.
That's good. Okay, and then Chris, I know you said you were going to come to this with a little more questions than perhaps specific, your own deep history with it. But when you think about these movies and the fact, I mean, it's undeniable that they're still around after however long, what's 70 years, possibly longer,
Longer,
yeah,
over 100 years in some cases.
100 years in some cases, yeah. So, what do you think is like the why behind Universal monsters?
I think it's because they're archetypes. I think they're universally recognized archetypes, and I don't think that can be said about a lot of of the more recent creations. And that's not me dogging on recent creations. I love recent horror, and I've watched way more of it than I ever did of the Universal monsters and even creature features. I've watched more like recent creature features. And by recent, I mean the past, 3-4 decades. But I think that they're just these archetypal horrors that really speak to us on a really primal level. So whereas I think you have some monsters these days that are interchangeable, and you end up, if we were to do a redux of the Monster Mash Showdown that we did last year, it comes down to like picking these little nuances between characters that allows one monster to trump another. But in this case, you have monsters that are fairly different from each other and represent different archetypes. And so that was something that I think gave them staying power in our imaginations and in the world of horror.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm like, they're also some of them are like fairly mortal, some of them are immortal, some of them are fairly human, or some of them like have, I guess, lost their humanity and are looking for it back. I mean, the Wolfman loses his humanity; he's trying to get it back. Dracula, I think, relishes his inhumanity.
Sure does.
Frankenstein is inhuman, and I think he wants to be human.
He wants his humanity. Yeah.
The creature is lost in time, I feel like, and the mummy sort of is lingering for the power.
Love. Well, in the movie, it was kind of like love based.
Right?
Love. He's lost love. Yeah. Well, Josh, so let's turn to you though, because I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but like I always pet you're more of a modern day creature kind of guy, like I would say the Michael Myers and the Krugers and the Jasons of the era, which are I guess this generation's version of the Universal monsters. But what did you see when you were checking this stuff out?
It was it's funny, before when Chris was talking, I was like, oh damn, because I had this whole like pun that you go, no pun intended, about the monsters. They're universal, right? Because that's the things, like when you watch Wolfman, when you watch Frankenstein, it's kind of like what Joe was saying too, like dark, like shadowy creatures hiding in the looming to get you, and they're overpowering you. These are all universal like traits that we fear. Like everybody has somewhat fear of the dark. Like you might have people that are like, oh, I'm not scared of the dark at all, but you put them in the right situation, they're going to be scared of the dark, And so it's on all of that, but then there's something that's kind of like, I guess what was sticking out to me when I was watching them, because I watched like a bunch of them in like 2 days before we started recording. I was telling about how I just, because they're 70 minutes each, so I was just like bump, 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 bump. Yeah, and but so I found myself so for the Frankenstein, Boris Karloff, that was actually pre-code movie, right? Like they had the Hays Code, which was all like it had certain rules that you had to follow up all the way up until maybe the late 60s or so. And so that's uh part of that code, I think, was like your bad had to be bad. That's why there's like a whole time of like
1934.
Like they're not bad guys that you kind of relate to, like, but Frankenstein you kind of did, because that was pre-code, so it could tell a deeper, more like conflicted story than say the Invisible Man, which just had to be a maniac, right? You couldn't have kids wanting to be the Invisible Man or anything like that. And so I think subjecting the audience to just like kind of this maniacal bad guys with probably such a weird shot to them too, and so that made them even more horrific. But that was almost like the filmmakers being so constricted by this code, I think also kind of made the movie scarier too at the same time. It was almost like a bounce back effect. And I think people getting scared is what makes them remember it the most. I know people that think Psycho is the most bloody, horrific movie they've ever seen, and you watch it and you're like, it's kind of quaint actually, like, or like Halloween 1 is kind of a quaint movie, but it's like everything you kind of don't see and that's playing around in your mind amplifies it. And I think the Universal monsters have that, because they can't show you a lot, they can't do anything, and it makes it even more terrifying in your mind. And I've been talking for a long time, so
No. I mean, no. I'm glad you said all that, Josh, because I do. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it does. It taps into a deeper fear, and I like what you had to say too about there's more nuance too in some of these monsters that we see. They're not just, because you can try and add backstory to some of the slashers, right, and some of the monsters, and give them a backstory, but like rarely does it make them more interesting beyond, okay, there's lore, okay, there's a reason that this person is like this, but like, do we really need to know what when we see Halloween, do we need to know the backstory to Michael Myers? Arguably we don't, right?
And you could also argue that the more backstory you learn, the worse the movies get. This is
Darth Vader.
Yeah, I was going to say this is a horror movie podcast, so I didn't want to bring up Star Wars, but like that's what they try to explain everything so much, and it just all starts to crumble. It's like the unknown makes it that much more
Absolutely.
palatable. And then just really quick, James, because I forgot you mentioned I'm a more modern horror movie guy, but it's like watching Frankenstein. You're like, oh, that's just Jason Voorhees, just not menace, like not malicious. Like Frankenstein's like in the movie Cloverfield, how that monster's like he's like flailing and scared. He's not actually doing damage to the city aggressively like Godzilla does. He's kind of like running and hiding, and that's kind of like what happens with Frankenstein. Like he's kind of like he doesn't mean to kill that girl, right? He's just playing a game with her, the same game that they were playing with the flowers. But he's almost like Lenny from Of Mice and Men, like he just
Yeah.
hurts people accidentally. And but like if you took that same creature and just made him just like a shark that all he wants to do is kill, that's Michael Myers, that's Jason Voorhees. It's just if you add humanity into them, they turn into Frankenstein. Like so they're very close. You could see I saw shots in Wolfman and I was like, I think Rambo First Blood references this shot. It's like so ingrained in so many different aspects of cinema, these universal monsters and movies that I was like picking up all these like references, seeing how deeply entrenched in cinema history it all is. It was like super eye opening.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you all like hit the nail on the head. Like it's the atmosphere that the black and white creates. It's the limit of storytelling. I mean, like you're saying, Josh, like they're kind of quaint movies. Like these are horror movies, but like most of the kills happen off screen. I mean,
Yeah.
Wolfman doesn't outright kill somebody like bite
No.
someone's throat off like in full like you're like hear it, you see the aftermath. You don't even see the aftermath. Like
No, you see, like it looks just like a Dracula bite, right? Like he leans in and his head covers her neck, and then there's like screaming and cutaways,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're just like, oh, that's like the death is right there. Yeah, there's some
yeah,
really cool stuff. Yeah.
yeah, and it's not like all about the blood and gore. It's about the suspense. It's about
Yep.
the. I mean, but I guess I like these because they really are character pieces. I mean, everybody. I don't think any one of the main monsters who's our antagonist. Like we're in for like the monster. You really don't care
Yeah.
about the. I mean, some of the humans you do. I mean, obviously in the Dracula lore, you got Van Helsing, you got Mina Harker, you got like the whole cast that you're familiar with just from literature, let alone like just the movies and what they've done with them. Obviously, Victor Frankenstein and his creation, The Bride, that's a whole. Actually, I guess all of them kind of have at least the top three. I mean, and again, I being biased, but Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Wolfman are probably the top three, and all of those have like really enriched like casts of like characters that you interact with, like. The creature from the Black Lagoon, I really don't know who's on the boat with that creature. I'm rooting for the creature. The mummy, I know it's him, and I know he's trying to get back his lost love, but I don't know anyone else in there. But
It's really funny because I think somebody when we were talking said that they didn't like the mummy. It was like it was one of my favorites, up except for like Wolfman and Frankenstein was good too. But the mummy was just such a unique monster in comparison. Like it like to be he was like the first one of the monsters that kind of you could be like but I get where he's coming from. Like to have a love that deep that you would transcend death and everything, and then like so you get that. But then he's got this really one-off line that like really struck me in that movie where he was basically trying to tell her that she just had to die for them to both be immortal, and she's like saying no, and he goes like this line like, after all I've been through, you can't just do this one thing. Of course that one thing is dying, but still it's like that's such a like that's such an extreme example, but such a relatable emotion that he has of like when you're like going out of your way for somebody and then they just need more from you and you're just like, after everything I did, you can't like do this one thing for me. But of course that's not asking people to take their lives like the mummy was, but
well, he's like everything will be fine. But Joe, like when you were like were you attracted to these films when you were growing up?
Oh yeah, these were shown on TV all the time on like WOR, WPIX, WNEW. The local stations. You'd have a horror film club. There was Chiller Theater that ran for many years. Friday or Saturday nights. Yeah, you'd watch them with friends. You'd watch them with family. You get the popcorn and you jump. Even if you knew it was coming, you still jump. That kind of stuff. It was great. It was
What
great.
were the effects like really great watching it like younger? Like, because after like The Thing and Predator comes out, no special effects from back then are gonna hold like a candle really when you go back and revisit, you know. So, but like seeing it as these were the first ones to do it.
Well, we're watching them in black and white, watching it probably on maybe a 19-inch portable TV in 1968, whatever. But you're so enthralled by the menace that Dracula or the monster or the mummy or the Wolfman is wreaking upon people who usually deserve it, by the way.
That's the same trope that
And
happens
yeah,
in current slasher movies. Yeah.
so it's like you aren't. I mean, when he transforms into a bat and Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, it's obviously animated. Who cares? I mean, it's funny. It's part of the whole milieu of the film. I don't think we were looking at special effects then. We were looking at we wanted to be entertained, we wanted to be scared. So what
Yeah.
was that? Yeah.
The The Invisible Man, I would assume for that time was probably pretty mind blowing. Of
Yes.
the footprints in the snow, and the people getting pulled around by their scarves, and it that one kind of reminded me. Like I was like, oh, this could be a Twilight Zone episode. The
Hmm.
Invisible Man.
Well, I want to say about the Invisible Man because I'd actually not seen that movie up until more recent history. As much as I love the Universal monsters, I really didn't watch like the original Invisible Man all the way through. I mean, as
Let's
much
see
as the
it in
classic,
ages.
and
Mm.
I would argue, and Josh, you can correct me because you've seen it a little bit more. You saw it in the last 2 days. Um, for a single individual in one of these movies, the Invisible Man killed more people than all of the
Yes,
monsters combined
combined.
when he
He
derails that train and kills
Yeah,
like how many
a
hundreds of
hundred.
people?
Oh, yeah.
It's a. They say they're killed. Mention how many people he killed, and they go, and then the 100 that died in the train crash. Like so, it was 100 in the train, and then his individual murders before that too. Like it was
This
wild. Yeah.
like this is I mean being invisible obviously is like I mean it's well I think the Invisible Man trope is more that the monster is the person itself, not the it's
Or
what you
the
do with it.
absence of
Mm.
accountability and like law. Like if no one could see you do something, you would do these like horrible things, right?
Yeah,
That's
but
kind of what
so
it's playing
like
at.
but in reality he's just a person, he's a mortal person who's invisible, but yeah he's
Mhm.
the most of like I mean obviously Dracula has killed more people than that in his entire being if you
Well,
go
he's
from
been
the
around for
from
500 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
if you rack up 500 years of kills he's killed more people, but in a single movie like the
Oh
Invisible
yeah.
Man has
Well,
killed
pound for pound, like the Invisible Man killed like 100 and some, I don't know, 150 people in about like 12 hours. Like Dracula probably has that over the course of like 120 years. But like Invisible Man
You
just
know who should be
killed them.
a Universal monster movie character just for kills? Oliver Queen.
Oliver Queen.
8 seasons of Arrow, thousands, thousands, maybe tens of thousands.
Yeah, but Joe, they failed the city. They failed the
Yeah,
city.
kill
That's
the city.
that's what
Well, I think that's also where you have to look into intention, because I think that's the interesting thing about the Universal monsters too, is that some of them are monsters by nature, some of them are monsters by choice. I agree that Dracula relishes his inhumanity, right? But
Mm.
also, dude has to eat, right? Like, so it's I think that's sort of the fun thing is because it was one of the things that I really liked actually about oh gosh, I'm gonna forget the guy's name. But he was in the JMS run on Spider-Man, who was hunting Spider-Man and ends up
oh,
taking his
Morlon.
Morlock, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and even as he's like dying, he says, "I was just hungry," and it's like you were also monstrous in the way you tried to get Spider-Man's attention, right?
Mm.
But he also does have to eat. So like, I don't know. I enjoy the we don't need the body count for them to be monsters. And I think more there's something less haphazard and more precise about the Universal monsters, I think, than a lot of modern day monsters, where a lot of killing I think is more casual than you see in the Universal monster movies. It feels like in the Universal monster movies it may be unintentional or it may be extremely intentional and
Yeah.
not as haphazard. It's not a Rogue One. I don't care. I'm gonna do this again. It's not a Rogue One Vader thing where Vader has a goal and he just slaughters everybody on his way down the hallway to get those plans, right? So I don't know. I'm push back on this because again, I'm less familiar, but is there something to be said for the fact that like they tried to create the horror without it being centered on the killing.
Oh yeah,
I would agree
yeah,
with that.
Because
I
I would think that's pretty modern. Like I would think that from right around Halloween one, maybe there was like Black Christmas or something before that. Like I think that's when the murders in movies and monsters start to get more intentional. And um, Whereas, like, yeah, like Frankenstein doesn't mean a lot. Like, cause even when he kills, I almost said Igor because Young Frankenstein is just the Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein combined into like an SNL skit. Like, it's wild. But I forgot his name, but he Frankenstein kills him because he's torturing him with the fire on the torch, and then accidentally kills that the young girl, and then everybody's kind of like swarming in on him, rightfully so, as a monster that just killed a little child. Don't get me wrong, but like but his murders aren't as intentional, and I think that like even the Mummy, I don't know if his one or two of the murders might have been intentional, but the rest was just kind of like you're in my way, like I'm not you're in my way, so I'm gonna like make your heart stop. But it's not like
well,
a bloodlust, you
well,
know.
it was I was Igor. Igor was in Frankenstein, and,
E-
and Igor didn't die because he shows up later, Joe, right? As Bela Lugosi playing Igor, the same guy who broke Frankenstein broke his neck,
Mm-hmm.
and he appears in I think Son of Frankenstein after
That's
that,
on
which
my
is the
list.
third movie after Bride, and Igor's like, yes, I'm alive. The creature tried to kill me,
Okay.
but
Oh, okay.
he tried to kill me, but um, yeah, I like most of the monsters are reactive. I mean, like you said, like Chris said, Dracula's got to eat, but I also don't think
Mhm.
Dracula would be happy just quietly eating. I don't think he had any plans of taking over the world or I think he was just trying to eat and maybe make some brides for himself and just live underground. And Frankenstein is reactive. The mummy's looking for love. The Wolfman's got to eat too, I guess. Like
Yeah.
I don't know what
Yeah.
the
Well, the Wolfman was kind of like a compulsion, right? Like he knew that, like by seeing the star on the hand of the next victim, like that from the lore, he knew that that was the next victim, but he couldn't really stop it. Like he tried being like, take this necklace, run away, go away. So it's like, so not to like take, it's not like the Wolfman's innocent from like ripping out jugulars, but it does seem more like he doesn't have a choice.
well, he tried really hard in that movie to tell people like, lock me up. There's something
Lock me
wrong
up.
with me. Like, will you just believe me? And everyone like, again, not that these people deserve it, but those people in the Wolfman were like,
Yeah,
yeah,
they
you're
didn't care. Yeah,
just my crazy son. I'm going to tie him up, and
yeah.
and
He's been in America for 18 years, so what do you expect?
I
Because I think
mean,
that was the whole like point, right? He comes back to Wales, right from
from America, yeah,
America.
yeah,
Yeah,
and he also tries really hard to lock himself up, like to
Oh
not
yeah.
like
yeah,
once he knows what's going on.
yeah,
Larry Talbot's like the moral compass of the Universal monsters. He's
yeah.
like trying to, which is why he's the hero, and Abbott and Costello
And
meet.
I was gonna say like
Exactly. He is the hero.
that.
He
Yes.
is the
That
hero,
was a
yeah.
great bit when he was in Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein when he's like, whatever you do, like, don't come in here, lock the door. And then like, doesn't like Abbott go in to offer him like an orange or something like
Yeah.
so innocuous and like dumb, and he keeps oh, we forgot his suitcase, and he just keeps interrupting him,
I
and
mean
then they
that
just think he was drunk in the morning, right? Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about this before with Chris and Joe because I of all of them, I think Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein is one of my favorite Universal monster movies, and it's a comedy. But I think it works because there's the jokes with the two of them, but the monsters are completely
Are
straight. They're
yes,
straight.
yep,
They're like they're
Exactly.
not. No one's
yeah,
like if Abbott and Costello weren't there, Dracula would still be doing the same plan, and Larry
yeah.
Talbot would still be trying to stop it, and it's just a straight monster movie that has like laughs, which I think is like the that movie I always say is the archetypal of horror comedy.
Oh,
It's
it's the
like
first. Yeah, it's probably the first one. It's fine. Yeah.
That's the I could see that because that's what makes American Werewolf in London so like good too, is that it's like they make the comedy comedy and they make the horror horror. They don't try to cross contaminate each thing, and that's what Abbott and Costello and Frankenstein did. Like you said, like the monsters are untouched, and the comedy is it's Abbott and Costello comedy. It's just the other people in the scene are monsters. The Universal monsters. It was really funny. I'm a big fan of Abbott and Costello, but I never got around to seeing that one. And then because I always thought it was going to be kind of like almost like running out of ideas. Now all of a sudden they're meeting monsters, but then you watch it and you're like, oh,
Mm.
it's basically Monster Squad, with Abbott and Costello. Like
That's a good way to
the
put
o- the only thing that didn't make sense is like for Dracula to be like everything hinges on Frankenstein. We need him, and then you were like watching, you're like clearly Frankenstein's more of a gonna work against you more than help you. He's not. I don't know what does he offer that Dracula's like. I need this guy. Like that was the only thing that because he like trips, he's stumbling around, and you're like clearly he's gonna hinder you more than anything else.
But in a movie like that, if that's the only thing that doesn't make sense, I call that a win. If
You know what? Very
I
very
put
true.
together a script like that where I
Yeah.
go, okay, here's my idea. We're gonna take this this iconic comedic duo, and we're gonna have them meet a bunch of Universal monsters. But there's gonna be one part that you don't quite get. I feel like I did my job, and I
Yeah,
went
that's true.
90% of the way, and I need the rest of
Yep,
you do a little bit of work and come the other
I
10%.
like it. I like.
And arguably, Josh, just for the history of that movie, that was at Universal Monsters' lowest point, and that was at
Mm,
Abbott and Costello's highest point. They actually made that movie to try to resurrect Universal Monsters.
okay, did it work because it was
Oh,
very
I
Well,
didn't
bad?
know
I
that.
mean, it worked in the essence. I think that they then Abbott and Costello met the Mummy, and they met the
Yeah,
Invisible Man, and they met
but
Dr.
the
Dracula.
Jekyll and
monsters
Mr.
didn't have
Hyde,
a,
with Dr. Jekyll
Yeah,
and Mr. Hyde,
a
the
second.
killer, yeah.
the Killer. Yeah, so that movie's considered like the swan song for.
Of it.
That's fine. That was like considered the swan song for the Universal monsters, but yeah, but I mean, it worked out fantastically. Funny enough, I listened to like Kevin Smith's podcast, and he said like a long time ago, like New Line Cinema briefly teased the idea of doing a remake of that sort of like with Jay and Silent Bob
Oh,
meeting Freddy, Jason,
that'd
and
be so good.
All right.
I think it would have been great at the time. I think it would have been one of those movies that doesn't hold up, all these years later. But that's
that's
funny.
like my pinnacle, but it was like catching those two franchises, if you will, like
Okay,
at their different points in history. Which, but like you said, Chris, like it just was magic. Like you got to like the
Yeah.
audience was there for it.
Well, and there's something wild about taking those because it's not just an iconic comedic duo, right? Because you're talking about Lon Chaney, Bela Lugosi in films that you would never expect to see them in. And
Mm.
I think the number of times that we it's easy to take that for granted, I think, now, right? Looking back, because that happens sometimes. But like how frequently are we delighted by actors in movies where we don't expect to see them? Like, oh,
true. Yeah.
I never expected Christopher Lee to do something silly like this, right? When you see, I don't know about you guys, but when I see old interviews with Peter Cushing, he's such a delightful and kind and gentle man. I really enjoy watching interviews with him, especially with some of the other like horror icons, because it's so out of place for what from where I know him. So
Mm.
seeing them in these movies like these icons, it's kind of exciting and just kind of wild.
What James, you'll like this because we talked a little bit about the movie. Strangely enough, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein reminded me a bit of Big Trouble in Little China because once they're in the castle, they're like going to the same rooms of the castle multiple times, and that's what happens once they get into the compound, right? Like they keep going into the same room. One time it's flooded, the next time it's not. But like the way they kept spinning in and out of the walls and then escaping and then being brought back in and chained up, and it was just reminded me very much of that like same mechanic of you're just exploring all the different parts of this castle, but you're seeing the same places multiple times rather than showing how vast and expansive it is. You're just like they keep ending up in the same rooms or the same by the boat multiple times and they escape, and it just had that same feel following them while they're trapped in like one building, and
I
that's
mean, that wouldn't surprise me. I mean, John Carpenter's like a fan of cinema, so like
yeah.
to like borrow from the classics, which I know he liked that as well. I mean, we could go so many places with this, but
Mhm.
it just reminded me to like give a shout out to like we were talking about like all these monsters and stuff, but like shout out to Jack Pierce, who was Universal Studios like makeup guy, and he's the guy who created the makeup for Frankenstein
Mm.
and the Wolfman and most of these monsters. I hear he was like a little tough guy to get along with, but he was like creating this stuff before there was like latex appliances. Like that was all like spirit gum and
Yeah.
glue
Oh, that's
and
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
and cotton and like he was like making this stuff up out of like oil paints. Like he was just like he had this box, this concocted box where he
Yeah.
just put these creatures together. And yeah, so I just want to say shout out to him. It was like they didn't have latex appliances, I think, for the Wolfman and Frankenstein until like they started getting closer to Frankenstein meets the Wolfman and Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. Because before that, Jack Pierce was just making that stuff on the face of the actors as he was like
Wow.
like right before the shoot. How many hours that took? I think that took like 7 or 8 hours or something. And
An early call in the morning for makeup, right? Probably like 5 o'clock in the morning.
Oh,
at
right.
least
Shooting
Yeah.
spots.
and Lon Chaney, sadly, I mean, all of these, I mean, famous actors unfortunately had like, Ed Wood kind of like documents Bela Lugosi's like later life, but Lon
Yeah.
Chaney was an alcoholic, and he could be sometimes like rough person to work with, and he would be, for that Wolfman makeup, especially the transformation scenes, that would be done in real time. They would put a little bit of makeup on, and then
Because they
have
need him to stay completely as still as they can, so
Mm.
they could overlap the film. Otherwise, that's why you'll see the ghost image that happens every once in a while.
Yeah,
But like,
that's what. Yeah, I mean, I don't
yeah.
know if you had a chance to watch it, but like in Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, they do a scene where the Wolfman transforms like full face, like which they didn't do in the first movie. They just did his
No, they
legs.
do almost like a backwards a little bit with it, like it
They take it off. Yeah, yeah.
undoes it. Yeah, yeah,
But they had like he had him laying in bed, and they said like the pillow he was laying in was actually a molded plaster pillow,
yeah. So
so
he
that
couldn't move his head.
and then he would have to that like took hours and hours and hours to
Yeah,
film and just so
Wow.
anyway just a shout out to the people
I
who
love that stuff. Yeah,
like we're talking about effects before and how like what they compare today, but the work they had to do to get the effects that they did, which to me like I know it's like it's I can still appreciate those effects for what they are.
oh
Like
yeah, for sure.
I mean, looking at them, I'm still like, wow, this is like I don't know. They also the effect like if you put CG or whatever or like animatronics in those movies, they wouldn't work. Like what they did makes the feel like Joe said, like it's the black and white. Like it goes along with the black
Well,
and
yeah,
white. The effects. Yeah. Sorry,
yeah,
Chris,
we've
sorry.
talked about this though, right? The staying power of practical effects. Like it just they just always have. I mean, how often do we look back at like Muppets and what they were able to accomplish? It's one of the reasons why Farscape, I think, like has as much staying power as it does is because of the aliens and the way they're created. I think that's why. So I don't know.
I mean,
No.
Alien, Predator, The Thing, they're all practical effects, and when they get away from that, what I would think that it would look like is, even though it worked in the context, it would be like the animation of the bat in Abbott and Costello Frankenstein. I feel like it would be that jarring if you were to do other things. That's why you need the practical effects. Like I understand their necessity for it, but it would constantly look like that rather than edge of your seat stuff. It would.
Well, and I could be wrong about this. I mean, it's just sort of like as I'm thinking about it, but I think the thing that works so well with practical effects is the need for creativity. We don't need
That's
to
what I was
be
thinking.
Yeah, we don't need to be as creative. Like, listen, there are a lot of games that are, I mean, any game is fun because of the rules, right? Like rules and constrictions, they can make things fun because you look at any game like Dungeons and Dragons. If you start at level 20, it's not fun because there's no challenge. It's the same in a lot of video games. By the time you level up, ideally you've leveled up so you can fight the boss. But if you start at that level, the game's not fun. You're just going through, which, I mean, admittedly, if you want to go through and just, beat puzzles, like, okay. But I think I can't land the plane. It's just sort of making circles, circling me
I'm
up.
following you though. I'm following you.
Yeah, I think with special effects, especially computer generated effects, especially as good as they are, uh, there is no limit on what we can make. We can make whatever we want, right? So there's not a lot of. Listen, I was about to say something that undercuts the strength of my argument. there does need to be problem solving when it comes to animation and computer generated effects. There is, but it's not the same kind of problem solving we see with practical effects. And I think that sometimes those kinds of solutions lead to something much more interesting. And my thoughts on something like this are, I'm actually going to go over to to Indiana Jones. With Indiana Jones, one of the most famous parts is when, this big sword fight's going to happen and he pulls a gun instead, and everybody
Mm-hmm.
gets a big laugh instead of a big sword fight. So arguably the shot's ruined because we don't get the sword fight. On the other hand, what makes it so, it makes it's because Harrison Ford got sick. He couldn't do the fight that day. So they had to problem solve around it instead of, okay, CGI in somebody who can fight or whatever. So uh, I'm gonna land the plane here now, but I think my biggest thing is when we use practical effects versus CGI, because of the limitations of reality on practical effects, I think it creates a space in which problem solving needs to be more creative, which leads to more creative storytelling.
Yeah, you look at these makeup artists; they're basically working on a canvas, whether the actor, right, his or her face, and people are different bone structure, different height, different width, so they've got to take all that into account too when they're making these people to look like these monsters. So it's really amazing when you look back on it, the amount of work they had to do, how long it took, and then to create these prosthetics to put on these people. It's just it's an art form, and I think it might be a lost art form now because it's been superseded by CGI. And
Which,
yeah, I think we're all in favor of as much practical effects in the movies we can get nowadays.
well, that's why the computer effects have been getting so bad recently, is because they just keep piling more and more and more and more and more onto it, but you're not giving your artist enough time to
Mm.
do what's needed, so they have to cut corners where you can't, like, and it's kind of like already in the can then. Whereas, like, say if you're on a movie set and you're running out of time, so you can only apply half the makeup, then you're gonna be like, all right, oh, let's frame the shot that he's coming out of the darkness, so you only have to see half his face, and it's like finding practical solutions, which then oftentimes yield a better result. Because
Yeah.
to Chris's point with Indiana Jones,
Mm.
had they did it as scripted, I would bet an infinite amount of money that it would not be as great and stand out as that joke. But that the writers had all the time in the world to think of that scene, and what they came up with was a crazy action whip sword fight scene. And then on the fly, they had to think of something, and they came up with one of the most iconic things in the whole. Was it an anthology now? There's like a 5 of them or something.
Yeah, I mean
But
there are 5
There's
movies.
five of them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
anthology.
but I know, because Chris, you're a writer, right? Also, or am I misremembering? Okay,
No,
so
you remember
sometimes,
correct.
sometimes in my writing, with like short stories, if I'm like having like struggles and stuff like that, I will create a problem that I don't know the solution to. Like I'll have somebody in dialogue say something like something ridiculous. Like I think my most current one is someone going, "Wait, hold up, you slept with Jonas in a cemetery?" I had no idea. I was like, all right, now I gotta figure out how that happened. Just because like I needed to like ruffle something. I needed to create something. And so that's why I think in practical movie making, that happens just on its own. Like no one has to set out to be like, oh, let's cause a problem. That you'll just always run into problems with makeup, and you run out of glue, or you did this, or someone ripped the last prosthetic, and you have to think on the fly. And it helps people, because creative people, like, they create. Like, so sometimes you get more magic in the moment than sitting down and pondering what to do. Sometimes you need to just like shoot from the hip, oh, tying it back to Indiana Jones, let's go. Or like,
There you go.
and so I think that that's part of it. And then just also light, real light hitting a real object will always look better than fake light hitting a fake object.
Yeah.
And then it helps the actors
Great
too. It
point.
helps
yeah.
eye lines also, right? Because you could say he's here, this tennis ball on the stick, but you're not going to have the exact like eye contact and eye line as if you're looking at an actor with prosthetics. Like it just there's certain things that you could tell are kind of missing.
I'm really glad you said that because actually I watched something that was incidentally a little heartbreaking and I had to stop it because I was like, I'm not going to watch this. This makes me sad. But there was a short video of Ian McKellen, and he really struggled filming some of The Hobbit because he's sitting in at a table at the beginning of the film with these dwarves and a hobbit, and the way they filmed it, he needs to be filmed separately from them. So he had to go do the scene by himself, and at some point he kind of lost his place and he just kind of like broke down a little bit. You could tell he was so frustrated, and I just my heart broke a little bit for him because you could just see the frustration at being so isolated when he's really supposed to be surrounded by what 12? No, there are 13,
especially an ensemble cast too.
right.
Yeah.
There are 13 people around him, and of course that's not how he shot the whole movie. But trying to film that scene when he's supposed to be one of 14 people. He's the 14th. There are 13 others around him, and he's just there acting by himself, and like that's really hard to do. It's one of the most impressive things about Who Framed Roger Rabbit is how does Bob Hoskins do some of that acting under those circumstances, right? It's incredible, but it's really difficult to do. So I'm really glad you mentioned the light thing, Josh, and the actors, because I think you're absolutely right. I think it's like no matter how good you are, it's going to hit different. And the thing is, we've seen this in most movies, right? At some point, we go back and we watch a movie that used CGI, and we're like, ooh, those effects didn't age well. Or we're like, you know what, surprisingly, acceptable. But that's not exactly high praise, right? So a lot of that doesn't age well.
Yeah, I agree. Like with all, I mean, I'm always be game for practical effects. I mean, that's what my brother does, his practical stuff, and that's part of like I was interested in that, and so yeah, practical effects is really never going to, I think, or CGI is never going to trump like practical effects.
Even though you can see the springboard that George Reeves hits before he takes off, it's still a great takeoff, and nothing since has ever been better than George Reeves' takeoffs. Just by hitting that springboard, and most of the time, there's a springboard.
But like even something like that, because like he has to propel himself actually as a person and actor through the confines of gravity, right? So there's muscle, like little subtle things that like an actor's not going to get from just getting lifted on a string, right? That's why I love kung fu movies and I love the wire kung fu stuff, but like it's floating stuff, right? Like even if they go to jump, it's still like they like float up, and that's not going to look as good as an actor really having to generate themselves forward. And yeah, the downside, kind of like with the Abbott and Costello when I was joking about Frankenstein, it's like if the downside to something that good is just seeing the springboard, then they've done their job, right?
I wanted to just we were talking about makeup and effects and everything. I just want to like give a shout out to I think I'm going to say her name right. I hope so. It was Millicent Patrick. Was the woman who did the makeup and created the suit for the creature from the Black Lagoon. That was made by a woman. She did not get the credit at the time because I think some executive took the credit from her, but she is the person responsible for the design.
Some things never change, right?
The sculpture and the look of that, which
that's awesome.
I would say
1954, the creature.
1954, that creature still holds up to me.
Yeah. I think it's the best looking out of all the Universal creatures. Like that's the one that like I like the most because it looks the most like the thing that it is. Like Frankenstein doesn't look like he's cobbled from different parts. It looks like a guy wearing makeup, but that looks like a creature, you know?
Yeah. So she did an amazing job. The creature from the Black Lagoon, I think, is an amazing monster. I don't know if it always gets the same love because it came later as some of the other Universal.
Well, and I think there also, it didn't get as, I think also it doesn't get as much love because I think people also aren't sure what to do with it.
Yeah, because he's not like bad. Like it's just
it exists, and I don't know how to tell it. I think a lot of people don't know how to tell a different story with it. I don't know that people are necessarily attracted to telling it.
His
the
story
shape of was it the Shape of Water?
Shape of Water, yeah, but
that's a different story with it. Yeah, but still, like that's where you have to go with it. You have to be something that like out there.
I mean, the creature from the Black Lagoon is King Kong in a weird like they went there to find it to capture it. It
Yeah,
escapes. It steals a woman.
yeah.
It's like King Kong except on a
Or
smaller
like or
scale.
like Beauty and the Beast, just without the Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah,
Like, yeah.
yeah.
Well, speaking of stories that come next, I'm curious and think on it, pass, whatever you want to do. But this was one of my biggest things was I'm curious, what is one of your favorite derivative monsters or characters that derive from a universal classic monster? You can trace their lineage and go, yep, I see where you came from.
Oh, the Incredible Hulk, right? I mean, you wanted this
Yeah.
a film or just something
No, no,
derivative?
no, no. I mean, it doesn't
Whatever
need to be a
medium.
film. It can just be a
Whatever-
character.
Yeah, the Incredible Hulk is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right?
I would,
Good
for
choice.
me, I would say Jason Voorhees as Frankenstein for sure.
Okay.
Especially once he becomes more actual, like the living dead. Like after he gets struck by lightning, and then he's basically kind of like a zombie, but he's just a brute. Like he's just more malicious. But you could see, a form like a person that was dead brought back to life, and is just monstrous. So yeah, the
Yeah, I don't know if I have a single one, Chris. It's a tough one. I mean, I'm just gonna like I have. I mean, listen, we had an article in our recent third anniversary episode with Len Wein talking about it, but I would say Swamp Thing is like part Wolfman, part creature from the Black Lagoon,
Yeah,
and part Frankenstein.
okay,
yeah,
yeah,
Like
all
he's like
right.
a. I think he's a derivative of all the monsters. Swamp
Yeah,
Thing.
I would think that if the Universal monsters didn't exist, Swamp Thing would not have been created, like wouldn't exist.
Well,
Because I think,
neither would Man Thing. I mean,
yeah,
most
like,
of the monsters we see in comic books are probably not like
well, because
exist.
it's like you could tell that they're like whoever made Swamp Thing, right? Like I only know Alan Moore, but I know there's an actual creator to Swamp Thing. Like clearly, like you said, like grew up watching Creature from the Black Lagoon and Frankenstein. I probably watched all those types of movies, and that's how he got a taste for monsters, right? Because that's what happened. We all get a taste for the monsters.
Well, that's what Bernie Wrightson, who is the original artist for Swamp Thing, and he did the original 12-issue run. Bernie Wrightson is an amazing artist. He actually did his own illustrated version of Frankenstein, which is beautiful. But
Mm.
Oh,
but that's what he drew. He drew all these monsters. That's what he grew up on. Like that's what he grew up drawing and trying to like. He has like if you look at his body of work, he's drawn classic Wolfman and Dracula and Frankenstein the creature many times in many forms, and he's the artist. He's the guy who designed Swamp Thing. So there's definitely you can. It's not a one for one, but you can definitely see like the lineage of. I mean, and I'm just naming Bernie because I know him, but I'm sure. And Joe, there's probably many artists who you could see the lineage of what they grew up with and what influenced them to make.
Well, Steve, is it Steve Bissett?
Was Steve Bissett? Yeah, Steve
Sure,
Bissett.
right? We
Yeah.
talked about him, right? Swamp Thing, Alan Moore, Swamp Thing, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, Steve Bissett for the Alan Moore run, definitely watch those
Yeah,
monster movies. Yeah,
trying to think of a
definitely.
few
yeah.
others, but
Does everybody remember kind of their first like taste of a monster movie, like grabbing them when you're just like, I'm scared, but I also like this.
you're scared, but you can't turn away. Yeah.
Yeah, yep.
It's a good question.
Hmm.
For me, it's actually easy. For me, it was Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. Actually,
Oh, okay.
that was the
Probably
first time
definitely too.
I met
Yeah.
those monsters was through Abbott and Costello.
I think that's
Uh,
my entry also, Chris. Yeah.
What made me think of the question was something that Chris said much earlier. Mine was the Hunchback, the Charles Lofton Hunchback, because I was always like, yeah, I was the kid that was an old soul and everything like that. Because I would spend my lunch money like go to the town video store instead of buying lunch, and I would get like Charlie Chaplin movies um or anything that like maybe my dad watched growing up. He was born in 1948, so that's how I knew of some of these movies. And the first time I saw Hunchback was it was like the first time I saw something like grotesque, and then you kind of get the deeper picture behind that he's not really grotesque, but like they like rip his shirt off and he's got that gnarled hump and he's getting like flogged, and then he's like I remember like being so because I was young, so enthralled with like almost like the pirate feel of swinging on the ropes from the bells, and that he was like jumping on the bell, like he was like kind of like mad and is like made friends with the bell, like all of that stuff at like a young age, I was just like, it was like I was scared of him. Like when he's like jumping on the bells, like laughing. I think the Esmeralda, I believe, is like, I think she's scared, and as I'm watching it, I'm scared too. But he's just playing, like he's just having fun, and so there's something very. It was the first experience with that kind of like monster that like grabbed me, and
Yeah,
so yeah.
it's. I haven't seen that movie in years. If only he had climbed down from that bell tower sooner, he could have been the halfback of Notre Dame. I'm sorry. I had to do it. I know because we give me a thumbs down. I had to do it.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess my parents or my mom was into monster movies. So like when I was young, like I watched these things like really early, probably maybe earlier than I should have. But like I don't know if it was
That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it.
I don't know if it was TNT or TBS or PIX, but they
Probably
used to
PIX.
they had the marathon, so I saw all the original Universal monster movies. At the same time, I was introduced to Godzilla, like the. So I just was like, I was in for them.
Did Godzilla come before the Universal monsters?
Well, he was 19. No, he came later.
No, he's in the 50s.
Because the original Gojira is 1954. I think.
Mid-50s, right? Yeah,
I think 54 is the black and white like original Godzilla.
But King Kong was in the 30s, right? That was
1933.
Yeah.
33.
Nice, thank you, Joe.
Yeah. I mean, even prior to like, I guess, well, didn't they do Nosferatu prior to Bela Lugosi?
Yeah, that was like 1919 or something. I was crazy,
Nosferatu.
like 20 something. Yeah.
Why can't I think of the director now? What?
Oh,
I should know this.
1922.
Oh my God, you're killing me right now.
Yeah, we should know.
Like,
We should know this.
I can't get it out of my mouth, but it's sitting in my brain. I have to.
I'm sorry. Did you say the director?
Director of
yeah.
Nosferatu.
F.W. Murnau.
Yes,
yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I knew once I could place the letters. That's why I was like, K, no, K. What are the two letters? In the
So
movie,
that's when I think that's like it's not the first because is it the first? I forget what
it was a silent movie, so that was but it was obviously Dracula was written first because it is. I don't think they could get the rights to Dracula, right? So that's
what it was. They couldn't
right?
They couldn't get his name, and so it ended up being Nosferatu. And I think they had to make some changes on the fly because it couldn't be too similar to Dracula or it'd be copyright infringement.
So you'll have the boat. There's the boat scene and all of that, but it's
That's before Dracula was a public domain, so you had to like change the track.
Yeah. Do you know what? I surprisingly have never read Frankenstein or Dracula, and for no other reason than it was assigned in high school, and I was just like.
Dracula's a good read. Frankenstein's a good read. Frankenstein is considered the first science fiction story ever.
And it was, I think that was written over like a weekend, right, or something.
Yes. It was a dare. It was a dare. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which they kind of reference in Bride of Frankenstein, right? Because it starts with that cold open of Mary Shelley talking.
That's right. I
Which is
forgot
weird
that.
because
It's been so
the Bride of Frankenstein's not even really like a monster if you think about it, because it's like it's basically saying like she doesn't exist. Had I written a sequel, it would have been this. And so you're just kind of like, well, Bride of Frankenstein kind of like snuck in there for someone that was just a thought experiment.
Well, actually, like the Frankenstein. Well, Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, if you put the two movies together, are actually the full book of Frankenstein. Because the creature in the original book is much more articulate, and he starts off like Boris Karloff's Frankenstein, but eventually he learns to read, he learns to reason, he learns what anger and vengeance is, and he starts killing Dr. Frankenstein's family, and he makes a deal with Dr. Frankenstein: if you create another one like me, I will leave you alone. And so Dr. Frankenstein starts to make this creature and then realizes he refuses to bring another being like this into the world. And so then Frankenstein's like, well, since you killed my bride-to-be, I will see you on your wedding day and kill your bride. And and then they end
Yeah,
up
I got to read this now, man.
hunting
It's
each other to the ends of the earth. It's a great book.
it is.
Okay, yeah.
It's a fantastic book.
Is that
It really
one?
is.
Is it all journal entries or
The
no?
first,
No.
That's Dracula, right? It's
Dracula,
like
Bram Stoker's
letters,
Dracula.
journal
Yeah.
entries, and
It's a
well, the
mystery
beginning
novel.
of Frankenstein is journal entries because Victor Frankenstein is retelling his tale to a shipboat captain, but then eventually
oh, okay,
translates to just Victor's narrative.
okay. Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
definitely have to read these. Are any other ones? I know Phantom of the Opera is a book, right? I think.
Invisible Man is good too. I mean, it's
It's
H.G.
that's
Wells.
H.G. Wells, right?
Yeah,
Is it similar to that, or is it?
I think when I read The Invisible Man, it was pretty close. It was pretty
Okay,
close. So is Doctor
so
Jekyll and
he.
Mr. Hyde. That's another great. Is that Wells? No. Is that Wells?
No, that's
Oh,
No, that's Robert Louis Stevenson, isn't it?
thank you,
Thank
Robert
you.
Louis Stevenson. Thank you. Can't give Wells
I was going
everything.
to say Stephen
Yeah,
Crane.
uh, so
That's
he,
your badge
he
of
did
courage.
Headless Horseman, right? Is that how he did Headless Horseman, Stephen Crane? Or am I thinking of?
Oh no, that's
No.
Irving Washington did the Hellas Horseman.
Oh,
I
okay.
think so.
But
Yeah.
Sleepy Hollow,
Um,
yeah.
um,
Now we're just evolving into books, audience.
Yeah,
I know.
well, I mean, source material. Yeah.
here we go. Talk here. We're gonna pull it in for the comic book session right here too. The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. They're all Universal properties, or no?
I do not know.
No,
No,
they're
those
not.
are but they're all classic books of that era. That's why they can go match
Okay,
together.
so because they're I only saw the really bad movie, and I think James, you told me that like
Well, the
Alan Moore
book is
wrote
amazing.
it. Yeah, so I was like, I have
Very
to
good
give
book.
it like a
Yeah,
chance. But
Alan Moore. If that movie is like one, like it's just like a fraction of the stuff Alan Moore does in his League of Extraordinary Gentlemen's run. But yeah. So I guess final thoughts of any final thoughts on the Universal monsters. I guess my final thought would be, audience, if you've not checked them out, like Josh Murray just binged a whole bunch of them in 2 days.
yeah.
They're definitely bingeable, and you should check them out. But anyone else final
Well,
thoughts?
I had some flashbacks. I'll just throw those out. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1913. But there was a silent non-universal even before that. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1923. So these things preceded Dracula and Frankenstein. Um, Glenn Strange, the actor, played the monster in three movies. Let's see, he played Abacus Meet Frankenstein, House of Frankenstein, and House of Dracula. The two house movies are where they mashed all the characters together. But Glenn Strange then went on to have a very long career as a bartender behind the bar at the Long Branch for 222 episodes of Gunsmoke. Yeah. So, first time I saw him, I said, "Oh, that's the monster." No, that's Sam, the bartender. So I just wanted to throw that in. I think that's. Oh, and the notable actors who played Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde: Frederick March, who won the Best Actor award in 1931, and Spencer Tracy in 1941. I like that one better.
Okay.
And Jack Palance played Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the '68 TV movie.
Wow. Okay.
And Karloff played him in Abbott and Costello Meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, holy cow!
Yeah. So.
It was a deep dive that I always wanted to do, and this gave me the perfect reason to do it. So I just like locked in, and I there was obviously a bunch I didn't watch because I knew Phantom of the Opera from like the Broadway musical and movie. It's like without it being the original movie. I already saw Hunchback, so I just kind of I knew Dracula the story pretty well through all different iterations. So I stuck with the ones I didn't know. I did. I believe Joe said that Bride of Frankenstein and Frankenstein were some of your favorites, so I made sure to watch those.
Those
The Mummy, I enjoyed. I could see why people didn't like it, but it was kind of like refreshing to me. Like, oh wow, this was different. But it was because I always had a love for like say like the Monster Mash pinball or Monster Bash pinball, then the Monster Mash song. Like, so I always had a love for these creatures. So I was like, but I felt weird, like only knowing Dracula mostly from like Francis Ford Coppola and beyond. And so I wanted to like get back to the roots because I love them when they pop up in pinballs and other movies. Monster Squad, which I mentioned before, like all of that is like they're just fun creatures that you just everybody still kind of like knows them. They're like ones that get passed down because, like you said, over 100 years old, and we're talking about some of them right now still. And so I'm sure that when my niece gets older, I'll tell her about like Wolfman or Frankenstein. Like as you start hearing stuff, jokes about like, oh man, I just gotta Frankenstein this together, and they want to know what that means, and you can see how it goes on and on. So it's like they're very ingrained in us, and it was very fun to dive in. So thank you guys.
Excellent. And Chris, any final thoughts?
No, I mean, I this has been enjoyable. I think again, it's worth going back and revisiting. I think, it's fun going back and being able to trace from the roots of other movies to these movies and other creatures to these creatures.
Very true. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think don't expect necessarily a transformative experience. It doesn't hit everybody the same way.
Yeah.
I think some people come into them going, well, I don't understand why these are the classics. Get past the word classic just for a minute, because not all of them are going to hit you that way, and that's okay. But I think they have staying power for a reason. And if you go in with an open mind, I think, you could learn a lot about it, and you might get something out of it. And who knows, you might even enjoy one or two of the movies.
Yeah.
And to that extent, every time you like see something and it doesn't make you jump because you're like, oh, I've seen that a million times. It's like, yeah, but this was the start of those million times that everybody saw it. Like all those like tropes, like this was the first time people were seeing them. Some of these effects, so it's like that's why they made the splash that they did, even if they don't hold up exactly now. But they're still good. 70 minutes, like why not? It's like good times.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they don't make movies like in 70 minutes anymore, so audience like it's
No,
like,
they
that's
do not.
no time is all. So
Barely
so-
make TV shows like that.
yeah, barely, right?
Yeah.
So, listening audience, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Universal Monsters. I hope you've enjoyed it. Obviously, if you have your thoughts about these movies, if you check them out, you're a fan of them, we'd like to hear from you. So please put your comments on the Facebook page of Secret Origins of Mint Condition. Of course, I could not have got my way out of Castle Frankenstein without my other hosts. So thank you, Joe.
You're welcome, James. I'll bring the garlic the next time.
Thank you, Chris.
My pleasure. It's always a good time.
And thank you, Josh.
Thank you for having me. I love it. I love being on this. So thank you.
Absolutely. And so now we're going to leave Castle Frankenstein. We'll get in the boat and we'll have to navigate out of the lagoon, but hopefully we'll be fine with that as well.
And hopefully the Invisible Man hasn't joined us in the
It's
boat.
not smoking cigarettes.
Right. Yeah.
Vincent Price.
So listening audience, thank you so much for another Halloween episode, and we will talk to you on the next episode.